I will warn you only once. Get ready. There are territories in the world where geography is not just a landscape, but the reason war starts, conflicts continue for decades, and entire countries clash. Most people think they are distant places, but each one hides surprising facts that almost no one knows. And when you discover the last ones in this video, you will understand why these wars have lasted for decades, even centuries, without resolution. 35. The village that changes countries every few meters. In the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, there is an almost surreal place, the village of Panmunjom. Although technically it is within the most militarized strip on the planet, there are buildings where a simple table marks the exact border between the two countries. What is striking is that inside certain negotiation rooms, you can be seated in South Korea, while your interlocutor is literally centimeters away in North Korea, separated only by an invisible line on the floor. This micro-border has been the scene of defections in seconds, tense face-to-face confrontations, and historic negotiations that have defined decades of frozen conflict. 34. The Ukrainian neighborhood where the war went underground. In the city of Bakhmut, one of the most devastated points in the war between Russia and Ukraine, there is a network of tunnels and industrial basements that became invisible front lines. The troops not only fought in destroyed streets, but also underground, in old salt warehouses and industrial structures reused as modern trenches. In some cases, both sides were separated by just a few concrete walls, hearing each other digging, moving, or even talking, creating a constant psychological war in closed, dark spaces. 33. The capital where embassies operate under constant threat. In Port-au-Prince, Haiti, there are areas where even foreign embassies operate under near-siege conditions due to gang territorial control. Some neighborhoods around diplomatic facilities are so dominated by armed groups that access is only possible via armored convoys or helicopters. What is most striking is that these areas are not in a declared war, but function as autonomous micro-territories where the state practically has no presence, redefining what modern urban conflict means. 32. The lake that divides two worlds in permanent tension. Pangong Tso Lake on the border between India and China is one of the most peculiar disputed points on the planet. Its waters change color depending on light, but what is truly striking is that it is de facto divided between two nuclear powers. In winter, when the lake freezes completely, soldiers from both countries have literally confronted each other walking on ice in hand-to-hand combat without firearms due to prior agreements, making this place a unique stage of modern confrontation. 31. The Syrian city where streets remain divided house by house. In Aleppo, particularly in its eastern part, during the most intense moments of the civil war, there were streets where one sidewalk belonged to one side and the other to the enemy. Entire families were trapped inside buildings, partially controlled by different factions. In some cases, holes were made in interior walls to move between houses without exposing themselves to snipers, creating an improvised urban labyrinth that completely transformed architecture into a survival mechanism. Before continuing, make sure to subscribe and leave a like to keep discovering the strange and incredible geography of our entire planet. 30. The artificial island that triggered tensions in the South China Sea. At Fiery Cross Reef, China built an artificial island over a point that barely rose above the water before. What is impressive is that it now hosts a complete military airstrip, radars, and defense systems amid waters also claimed by other countries like Vietnam and the Philippines. This type of expansion has changed the geopolitical map without needing to conquer traditional territory, demonstrating how modern conflict can literally create new lands to reinforce claims. 29. The mountain pass where Afghanistan never really had control. The Wakhan Corridor, a narrow strip of Afghanistan that stretches between Tajikistan, Pakistan, and China, is one of the most isolated zones in the world. Despite being part of the country, its extreme geography has historically prevented any Afghan government from exercising total effective control. Recently, its importance has grown due to proximity to multiple unstable regions, making it a silent strategic point where borders exist more on maps than in reality. 28. The town divided by a line painted on the ground. In the city of Nicosia, capital of Cyprus, there are streets where a simple line, accompanied by barriers and sandbags, separates the Greek Cypriot part from the Turkish Cypriot part. What is most striking is that this division runs through houses, shops, and even abandoned cafes, frozen in time since 1974. Some homes were cut in half, with a door in one country and the window in another, becoming a tangible symbol of a conflict still unresolved. 27. The invisible border in the Western Sahara Desert. In Western Sahara, the conflict between Morocco and the Polisario Front has generated one of the longest and least known structures in the world, a berm of sand and landmines over 2,700 kilometers. This berm divides the territory in two, and the most disturbing thing is that it is not visible as a traditional border. In many areas, it is simply a line in the desert, but one of the most dangerous on the planet because of the huge amount of explosives buried around it. 26. The Yemeni port through which almost all aid and conflict enters. The port of Hodeidah in Yemen is one of the most critical points of the conflict in that country. Most humanitarian aid passes through here, but it has also been the scene of intense fighting. What is striking is that control of this single point can determine the survival of millions of people, making it a place where geography, a simple port, has direct consequences on the life or death of an entire population. 25. The Libyan city where each neighborhood has its own army. In Tripoli, Libya, after the fall of Gaddafi's regime, different militias took control of different neighborhoods. Some streets are controlled by completely different groups just a few blocks apart. What is surprising is that these militias establish their own checkpoints, rules, and even systems of justice, creating extreme fragmentation where the official city map does not reflect who actually holds power in each area. 24. The Kashmir Valley where communications shut down completely. In the Kashmir region, especially in cities like Srinagar, authorities have imposed total internet and telecommunications blackouts on multiple occasions for prolonged periods. This turns a modern city into an almost completely isolated space from the world within hours. The political geography here is not only measured in territory, but also in absolute control of information, affecting the daily lives of millions of people. 23. The Russian enclave in Europe surrounded by NATO. Kaliningrad is a Russian territory separated from the rest of the country, located between Poland and Lithuania. What is striking is that this small region is heavily militarized and completely surrounded by NATO member countries. Its position makes it one of the tensest points on the European continent, where any military movement can be interpreted as an escalation, turning this enclave into a true geographical hotspot. 22. The border between Israel and Gaza seen from drones. In the Gaza Strip, the border with Israel is not just a line, but a complex system of walls, sensors, automated towers, and constant surveillance. From the air, it looks like a technological scar cutting across the territory. What is most disturbing is that much of the monitoring and military response is automated, making this zone one of the most advanced and controversial examples of territorial control through technology. 21. The strait where a global crisis could start within hours. The Strait of Hormuz near Iran is one of the most strategically important geographical points in the world. At its narrowest part, it is barely 33 kilometers wide, but a large part of global oil passes through here. What is striking is that any blockade or conflict at this point could immediately affect the world economy. The constant tension in this area means that a relatively small space has a disproportionately large impact on the entire planet. 20. The Ukrainian city where a nuclear plant remains in a war zone. In Energodar, southeast Ukraine, is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, and since the beginning of the conflict has been in a completely unprecedented situation, an active nuclear plant under military occupation. What is striking is not only its size, but the fact that it has been the scene of nearby bombings, power outages, and constant tensions between Russian and Ukrainian forces, with workers forced to operate under armed pressure. Geography plays a key role here. The plant is located next to the Dnieper River, making it a strategic point for both energy control and territorial dominance. Every incident in this area generates global concern, as any mistake could trigger a nuclear disaster with international consequences, turning a regional conflict into a continental-scale crisis. 19. The Gaza tunnel that connects two hidden worlds. Under the Gaza Strip, there is an extensive network of tunnels built over the years, many connecting with Egypt or crossing strategic zones within the territory. Some of these tunnels are reinforced with concrete, equipped with electricity, and even designed to transport small vehicles or weapons, becoming an underground infrastructure parallel to the surface. The most striking aspect is that this network is not only for military purposes, but has also been used for years to smuggle essential goods, creating an underground clandestine economy. In many cases, the destruction of these tunnels has caused collapses on the surface, affecting civilian housing, demonstrating how the conflict transforms the subsurface into an invisible battlefield. 18. The Russian city where attacks are no longer distant. In Belgorod, a Russian city near the border with Ukraine, the war has ceased to be something distant and has become a daily reality. Explosions, drones, and cross-border attacks have impacted residential areas, something that for a long time seemed unlikely within Russian territory. The geographical proximity turns Belgorod into a kind of gray zone, where the line between front and rear disappears. Makeshift shelters, sirens, and occasional evacuations have changed the daily lives of its inhabitants, showing how modern conflicts can spread beyond official combat lines. 17. The refugee camp that became a permanent city. Dadaab in Kenya is one of the largest refugee complexes in the world, composed of people who have mainly fled the conflict in Somalia. The striking fact is that what began as a temporary solution in the 1990s has transformed into a de facto city with entire generations born there. The geography of the place in an arid and isolated area makes dependency on humanitarian aid total. However, over time, markets, schools, and social structures have emerged, creating a space that does not fully belong to any country or system, reflecting how prolonged conflicts can generate permanent human territories outside the traditional political map. 16. The passage between Armenia and Azerbaijan sealed by war. The Lachin Corridor, which connects Armenia with the Nagorno-Karabakh region, has been one of the most critical points of the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. For years, it was the only access route for thousands of people, but recently it has been blocked, leaving entire populations practically isolated. The most striking thing is how a single mountain road can determine the fate of an entire region. The lack of access to food, medicine, and basic supplies has turned this corridor into a symbol of geopolitical pressure, where control of a few kilometers has massive humanitarian consequences. 15. The Sudanese city where two armies fight street by street. In Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, the conflict between the regular army and paramilitary forces has turned the city into an active urban battlefield. Unlike more linear wars, here there are no clear fronts. Fighting occurs in residential neighborhoods, bridges, and government buildings. The location of Khartoum, at the confluence of two great rivers, the Blue Nile and the White Nile, makes it a vital strategic point. Controlling its bridges means controlling movement within the city, which has led to intense clashes at these points, turning civilian infrastructure into key military targets. 14. The Moldovan enclave where time stopped in the Soviet Union. Transnistria, a narrow strip between Moldova and Ukraine, is an internationally unrecognized territory that functions as a de facto independent state with strong Russian influence. The striking fact is that it maintains symbols, political structures, and even its own currency with Soviet aesthetics, as if time had frozen. Geographically, its position makes it a delicate strategic point in the context of the war in Ukraine. The presence of Russian troops and weapon depots in the area has raised concerns about a possible expansion of the conflict, making this small territory a silent but constant tension hotspot. 13. The maritime border where Greece and Turkey almost clashed. In the Aegean Sea, especially around small islands like Castellarizo, Greece and Turkey have disputes over maritime delimitations affecting energy resources and territorial control. The surprising fact is that these tensions have led to military maneuvers, overflights, and situations where vessels from both countries have been on the verge of collision. The fragmented geography of the Aegean, full of islands and disputed waters, greatly complicates any agreement. A small islet can alter kilometers of exclusive economic zone, making every emerging rock a strategic element with international implications. 12. The Ethiopian city where neighbors became enemies. In Mekelle, capital of the Tigray region in Ethiopia, the internal conflict transformed a relatively stable city into a war epicenter. The striking fact is that the conflict was not only between armies but also between communities that previously coexisted, generating deep divisions within society itself. The geographic isolation of the region, surrounded by mountains, hindered humanitarian aid access for long periods. This turned Mekelle into an extreme example of how geography can worsen a crisis, limiting international response capacity and leaving the population trapped in a critical situation. 11. The base in the Syrian desert where global powers clash. In Al-Tanf in southern Syria, there is a U.S. military base located in a strategic zone near the borders with Iraq and Jordan. The striking fact is that around this base there is an exclusion zone where Syrian, Russian, and Iranian forces have had indirect clashes or constant tensions. The location of Al-Tanf is no accident. It controls key routes historically used for transportation and troop movements. In the middle of an apparently empty desert, this point has become a geopolitical node where multiple powers' interests converge, demonstrating how even the most inhospitable places can be crucial in modern conflicts. Remember to subscribe and leave your like to keep learning incredible facts about every corner of our extraordinary world. 10. The Iranian city where a river disappeared and sparked protests. In Isfahan, one of Iran's most emblematic cities, the Zayande Rud River, which for centuries was the heart of urban life, has dried up for long periods due to water diversions, droughts, and mismanagement. The striking fact is that this phenomenon is not only environmental, it has triggered massive protests from farmers and citizens who see how a vital resource disappears amid internal political tensions. Geography here becomes a trigger for social conflict. The dry riverbed, once a gathering point, has turned into a space of protest and discontent. This case shows how modern conflicts do not always start with weapons, but with basic resources like water, especially in regions already marked by political tensions. 9. The Ukrainian port trapped under earth and steel. In Mariupol, during one of the most intense sieges of the war in Ukraine, the Azovstal steel plant became a last refuge for soldiers and civilians. The striking fact is that beneath this enormous industrial facility, there is a network of tunnels and bunkers originally designed to withstand attacks, which allowed resistance for weeks under extreme conditions. This industrial complex, strategically located near the Sea of Azov, became an improvised fortress. The combination of steel structures, underground passages, and its coastal location turned Azovstal into one of the most symbolic scenes of the conflict, where industrial geography played a key role in the resistance. 8. The Jerusalem neighborhood where every house is a legal dispute. In Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, every home can be the subject of legal disputes between Palestinian families and Israeli organizations. The striking fact is that these disputes are not abstract. They translate into evictions, protests, and confrontations that literally happen at the doorstep of the houses. Urban geography here is deeply politicized. An apparently quiet residential street can become an international conflict point within hours with police presence, demonstrations, and global media attention. This place reflects how conflict can concentrate in extremely small spaces charged with history and symbolism. 7. The Haitian city where the state completely disappeared. In areas of Port-au-Prince such as Cité Soleil, state control is practically non-existent, and the territory is divided among heavily armed gangs. The striking thing is that these organizations not only control security but also access to food, water, and movement within the area. The urban geography fragments into micro-territories where crossing the wrong street can be deadly. This type of control turns parts of the city into spaces where rules constantly change, showing a type of conflict where there are no defined front lines, but there is constant and structural violence. 6. The point in the Black Sea where ships cannot move freely. Near the port of Odessa, Ukraine, the Black Sea has become a highly militarized zone with naval mines, blockades, and constant surveillance. The striking thing is that key maritime routes for grain exports, vital for several countries, have become restricted or dangerous. The maritime geography here has global consequences. A localized conflict directly affects food security in entire regions, demonstrating how the control of a maritime space can impact far beyond its immediate borders. 5. The mountain between Korea where no one can live in the demilitarized zone between North Korea and South Korea, especially in inaccessible mountainous sectors, there are areas that have remained practically untouched for more than 70 years. The striking thing is that, due to the forced absence of humans, these spaces have become true natural sanctuaries where rare species, including red-crowned cranes and other endangered animals, have found refuge without human intervention. In ecological terms, it is one of the most fascinating and voluntary experiments on the planet. However, this natural paradise is completely surrounded by landmines, electrified fences, watchtowers, and constant military presence. The geography creates a brutal paradox, an almost pristine ecosystem that cannot be freely studied because it remains one of the most dangerous places in the world for humans. Even today, any attempt at scientific exploration is severely restricted, leaving much of its biodiversity a mystery. 4. The Iraqi desert, where borders are almost invisible in western Iraq, especially in the Anbar province near the border with Syria, there are vast desert expanses where official borders practically vanish on the terrain. There are no walls, no continuous fences, no clear signs, only sand, rocks, and kilometers of emptiness. The striking thing is that this lack of physical delimitation has allowed for years the almost invisible transit of fighters, weapons, and smuggling between countries. The open and extreme geography, with suffocating temperatures and frequent sandstorms, greatly hinders state control, even with modern technology. This turns the desert into a perfect strategic space for clandestine operations where armed groups can move, hide, and reorganize with relative ease. Here, the border is not a tangible line, but a vague idea that only exists on maps and GPS systems. 3. The Russian city where an airport defines the conflict in Donetsk, the international airport became one of the most intense symbols of the conflict in eastern Ukraine since 2014. The striking thing is that despite being completely devastated by the fighting, it continued to be fiercely contested for months, even when it could no longer serve any civil or operational function as an airport. Its elevated location gave it a crucial tactical advantage. From there, wide areas of the city and its access points could be observed and controlled. Furthermore, its reinforced concrete structure made it an improvised fortress where small groups resisted under extreme conditions. The battle for this place showed how a specific geographic point can acquire enormous symbolic value, becoming an emblem of resistance and control, even reduced to ruins. 2. The coastal strip, where every meter is watched from space in the Gaza Strip, the density of surveillance is so high that practically every surface movement can be monitored by drones, satellites, cameras, and advanced sensors. The striking thing is that this small territory, barely about 40 kilometers long, has become one of the most observed spaces on the planet in real time, where technology plays a constant role in the dynamics of the conflict. The compact geography intensifies everything. Millions of people live concentrated in a small area, meaning any event has immediate repercussions. This permanent surveillance affects not only military operations, but also everyday life, where the sky is not just a natural space, but a constant presence of observation. Gaza represents an extreme case of how modern technology redefines territorial control and spatial perception in contemporary conflicts. 1. The Ukrainian city where life goes on amid constant bombings in Kharkiv, one of Ukraine's largest cities located just a few kilometers from the Russian border, war has become part of the daily routine in a way hard to imagine. The striking thing is that, despite frequent attacks, many inhabitants continue working, studying, and maintaining some normality, adapting to an environment where air raid sirens are part of everyday life. The urban geography has been completely transformed. Metro stations turned into underground shelters, buildings reinforced with sandbags, and routes adapted to minimize risk. Even planning daily activities depends on proximity to safe shelters. Kharkiv is not only a strategic point due to its location, but also an extreme example of urban resilience where life persistently continues on the edge of danger. After learning these 35 geographic facts about the places that are suffering the most right now, tell us which fact impressed you the most. Any you want to share? Leave your answers in the comments and let's see how many of us choose the same one. And speaking of choices, the best thing we can do is watch the video on screen. That way we will become true experts in world geography. But before you go, don't forget to subscribe and hit like so we can keep learning together. See you in the video!